I opened my garage and froze. Two massive trucks were parked inside, not mine, and I had never given permission. When I asked my neighbor what they were doing there, she didn't apologize. She smiled, and told me she needed the space. That's when I realized she thought my property was hers. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Because there was one thing she didn't know. That garage wasn't just mine. It was leased. And not to a friend. Not to a business. But to the county sheriff. So instead of moving the trucks myself, I made one quiet call. And by the next morning, her confidence was gone, her excuses collapsed, and the rules she ignored came crashing down on her. Stay till the end. Because the moment she learned who really owned that space, everything changed. I never thought a normal day could turn into a complete nightmare. I pulled into my driveway after a long afternoon, tired, thinking about a quiet evening. My garage door was in sight, and I saw something unusual. Something that made my stomach drop. Two huge trucks were parked inside. My garage. My property. And these trucks weren't mine. At first, I thought maybe a friend had borrowed it. But that made no sense. Nobody calls me without asking anymore. Not anyone. I got closer. My heart started racing. There was no note, no message. Just two massive trucks, sitting in my garage like they owned the place. I knocked on the neighbor's door, hoping maybe they knew something. It was Mrs. Langley, a woman who lived 2 houses down. She was known in the neighborhood for being entitled. She smiled at me in a way that made my blood boil. "Oh, hi," she said casually, as if everything she did was completely normal. I asked her, calmly at first, what the trucks were doing in my garage. I tried to keep my voice steady. She looked at me, shrugged, and said, "I needed the space. I didn't think it would be a problem." I froze. She didn't even acknowledge that this was my property. She just assumed she could take over my garage. My personal space. My investment. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip her off the porch and throw her into one of those trucks. But I didn't. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Because losing my temper here wouldn't help. And, honestly, I felt like something bigger was about to happen. I stepped back and looked at the trucks again. One was a black pickup with tinted windows, the other a white utility truck. They looked official. Maybe someone had leased them for a job, I thought. But no, something didn't feel right. As I examined the trucks, I remembered the garage lease I had. I had signed it years ago and never mentioned it to anyone in the neighborhood. It was a legal, binding contract with the county sheriff's department, allowing them to use the space for vehicle storage and inspections. It was quiet, private, completely legitimate. Nobody in the neighborhood knew about it. Suddenly, a plan started forming in my mind. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to call the HOA or threaten her. I had the rules on my side, and I could let them do the talking. I stepped up to her again. "Mrs. Langley," I said, keeping my voice low but firm, "these trucks need to be moved." She laughed. A soft, mocking laugh. "Come on, it's just a garage. It's not like it's a big deal." That's when I realized how serious this was. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was about entitlement. About someone thinking they can take what doesn't belong to them and get away with it. And in my neighborhood, that kind of behavior usually escalates. I backed away and went inside, grabbing the lease paperwork. I scanned through the signed documents, every clause, every line confirming my rights. It was all there. Clear as day. The garage belonged to me, but it was leased to the sheriff's department. They could take action if someone interfered with the space. I felt a rush of calm. Finally, I had the upper hand. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to fight. I had rules and justice on my side. And the next steps I took would be quiet, precise, and satisfying. I made the call. One simple phone call. I didn't tell her who I was calling. I didn't explain anything. I just asked for confirmation that my lease was active and that unauthorized vehicles in the garage were not permitted. Within minutes, I felt the shift. That subtle change you can almost feel in the air when someone is about to be held accountable. The kind of change that makes people realize they miscalculated, that they overstepped. I went back outside, pretending to be relaxed, though my heart was still racing. Mrs. Langley was still standing there, confident, maybe even smug. But I could see the first hint of doubt in her expression. She wasn't expecting this. Nobody expected me to have the legal upper hand ready to enforce. I walked up to the garage one last time, made sure the trucks were still there, and left without saying a word. The suspense was unbearable, but I didn't need to confront her directly. The rules, the law, and the sheriff's involvement were going to handle that. And as I walked back inside my house, I started thinking about how entitlement works. People like Mrs. Langley think they can take what they want. They assume nobody is paying attention. They believe that authority is weak or won't act. But they're wrong. Always wrong. This was just the beginning. I didn't know exactly how it would unfold, but I knew the moment she realized who truly controlled that garage, the tables would turn. And when the truth was revealed, it would be satisfying in a way that yelling or arguing never could be. For now, I sat down, poured a glass of water, and waited. Watching, thinking, planning. It wasn't just about getting the trucks out anymore. It was about making sure the lesson was unforgettable. Because when entitlement meets rules, paperwork, and a little quiet patience, the results are dramatic, inevitable, and sometimes deliciously satisfying. I took a deep breath. The trucks hadn't moved. The neighbor still didn't understand. But I smiled. I knew exactly how the next day would unfold. And trust me, she would never see it coming. The next morning, I woke up early, before the sun fully rose. I didn't sleep well, my mind racing over every possible reaction Mrs. Langley could have. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought 2 trucks in my garage were a bold move she could get away with. But she had no idea what she was up against. I made another quick check through the lease paperwork. Every line was clear. I wasn't exaggerating. My garage had legal protection, and anyone interfering with it without permission would be considered trespassing. It wasn't personal. It was simply law and order. And now it was time to let the law speak. I stepped outside and saw the trucks still parked inside my garage. They hadn't moved a bit. I could practically feel Mrs. Langley's smugness radiating from across the street. She was standing at her front door, arms crossed, smiling at me as if she had won something. But little did she know, her smugness was about to crumble. I picked up my phone and dialed the sheriff's office. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten. I spoke calmly, politely, but with precision. Hello, this is regarding a leased garage space under your department. Unauthorized vehicles are currently parked there. Can you confirm how to proceed? There was a brief pause, then a polite response. They confirmed my lease, verified the space, and assured me they could send someone to check the property. They reminded me that any unauthorized use could be addressed immediately. I hung up and felt a surge of satisfaction. I didn't need to confront her directly. I didn't need to yell. I had the authority of the sheriff backing me, and that was far more powerful than anything I could do on my own. I went inside for a few minutes, just to calm myself. I could feel my heartbeat slowing down, but at the same time, I was brimming with anticipation. Watching someone like Mrs. Langley start to realize she overstepped, there's a special kind of thrill in that. Not mean-spirited, but satisfying. Justice served quietly, without my hands getting dirty. By mid-morning, I noticed her pacing in front of her house. She made a few phone calls, probably calling friends or other neighbors for advice. Her confidence from yesterday had vanished. Every gesture she made screamed nervousness. For the first time, I could see doubt creeping into her mind. Then it happened. A sheriff's car slowly rolled down the street. She saw it coming and froze. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her hands flew to her hips, then back to her sides. She didn't know what to do. I could see her scanning the neighborhood, hoping someone would distract them or that she could somehow talk her way out of it. But there was no escape. The deputy approached calmly, professional, and polite. "Ma'am," he said, "we've been called regarding unauthorized vehicles in a leased property garage." Her face went pale. She tried to laugh it off. "Oh, I thought it was okay." The deputy shook his head, explaining that the property was legally leased to their department and that no unauthorized vehicles were permitted. He asked her to move the trucks immediately. I stayed inside, peeking through the blinds. I didn't need to be outside. I didn't need to confront her. I just watched as the weight of the situation hit her. Every confident move she had made yesterday was gone. She was no longer smiling. She was apologizing. She was panicked. This is the moment I had waited for. The moment when entitlement collides with rules, authority, and consequences. The moment when someone realizes that their assumption of power was completely false. By noon, both trucks were removed from my garage. Not by me confronting her, but by the law, by rules, contracts, and authority. It was quiet, simple, efficient, and it made the point perfectly. Don't assume ownership over something that isn't yours. After the trucks were gone, I finally stepped outside. Mrs. Langley avoided eye contact, clearly embarrassed. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I simply nodded and went back into my house. The lesson had been delivered in the most effective way possible. Later that evening, neighbors started talking. Word had spread about the sheriff's involvement. Some of them laughed quietly, others shook their heads in disbelief. The story became a cautionary tale. Don't assume entitlement over others' property. It's one thing to test boundaries, but it's another to ignore documented rules. I sat on my porch, sipping a glass of water, reflecting on the events. I realized something important. Revenge doesn't always need to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it's about letting the system work for you. Letting karma and justice do the heavy lifting. I also realized that Mrs. Langley learned more than just a lesson about garages. She learned that quiet patience, proper documentation, and understanding your rights can make a huge difference. She learned that assumptions can backfire in the most unexpected ways. And most importantly, she learned that not all battles need to be fought with anger. Some battles are won with calm precision and a little patience. The day ended peacefully, but the impact lingered. I felt a mix of relief, satisfaction, and quiet triumph. The trucks were gone, the lease was upheld, and the message was clear. In our neighborhood, rules matter. Authority matters. And entitlement doesn't get you far. Even now, thinking back on that day, I can't help but smile. Not out of malice, not out of gloating, but because the situation unfolded exactly as it should have. Sometimes, the best outcomes aren't flashy. They're quiet, methodical, and satisfying in a deep, emotional way. Mrs. Langley didn't come near my garage again. She kept her distance. The neighborhood noticed, and quietly, she became more cautious about overstepping boundaries. The lesson had sunk in. And I knew, deep down, that the quiet power of rules and authority would always protect me in situations like this. That day taught me more than I could have imagined. Not about garages, trucks, or leases, but about patience, justice, and the power of letting things unfold naturally. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply doing nothing, and letting the consequences arrive. After the sheriff had removed her trucks, I thought the situation was over. I thought the lesson had been delivered, quiet and effective. But I was wrong. Mrs. Langley wasn't the type to let things slide. She didn't like being embarrassed in front of the neighborhood, and this had hit her ego hard. The next few days were tense. Every time I stepped outside, I felt her eyes on me. She would glare from across the street, pacing in her driveway, muttering under her breath. It was clear she was trying to figure out a way to get back at me, or at least restore her sense of control. Then came the small acts of provocation. First, it was leaving her trash cans in my driveway, accidentally, she claimed. Then it was her children playing loudly on my side of the fence, throwing balls near my property. I could tell from her smirk that she thought she was clever, that she could push boundaries without consequence. But I had learned my lesson. I didn't react. Instead, I watched. I observed. I noted every move. This wasn't just about the garage anymore. It was about strategy, patience, and letting the world see her for who she was. Neighbors started noticing. Whispers began in the cul-de-sac. People would casually mention the trucks in my garage, the sheriff involvement, and how she had overstepped. The gossip spread quietly, like a current under the surface, but powerful. I didn't need to speak. Others were sharing the story, and that in itself was a form of subtle, social karma. Then she escalated further. She began calling the HOA, complaining about minor issues on my property. The hedge is too tall, the mailbox isn't aligned, there's debris in the gutter. Each complaint was petty, clearly meant to annoy, but I knew better. I responded calmly, following every HOA rule, documenting everything meticulously. Each interaction was logged, each communication polite but firm. I wasn't giving her ammunition. I was preparing for anything she could throw at me. One morning, I noticed her parked a small trailer behind her house, staring at my garage from the corner of her eye. I knew then that she was scheming. But again, I didn't panic. I didn't yell. I kept my composure, reminding myself that the truth and proper documentation always carry more weight than anger or drama. Meanwhile, I started noticing subtle changes in the neighborhood dynamics. Neighbors who had been neutral were now watching her more closely. People who had quietly supported her entitlement were starting to realize that overstepping in our community has consequences. Without even trying, her arrogance was isolating her. Then came the confrontation I had been anticipating. She approached me while I was watering my front lawn. Her posture was stiff, her voice clipped. "I just don't understand why the sheriff had to get involved. You could have handled this yourself." I looked at her, calm and steady, and replied, "I could have, yes. But it's not just about me. It's about rules. Agreements. Respecting boundaries. That garage isn't just my property. It's leased, officially, to the sheriff. They enforce the rules. And rules exist for a reason." Her face flushed. She tried to argue, but the words didn't come out right. Her confidence faltered in the presence of logic and authority. And I noticed something else, her eyes darting nervously. She was calculating, trying to find some loophole, but there wasn't one. Not this time. From that day forward, she started retreating. The small provocations stopped. The HOA complaints dwindled. Her children played further away. She kept her distance, quietly resentful, but powerless to challenge me again. In the evenings, I would sit on my porch, reflecting on what had happened. I realized that what made this situation so satisfying wasn't just the legal victory or the sheriff's intervention, it was the way it unfolded naturally. She had exposed herself through her own entitlement, and the consequences arrived without me needing to do much at all. I also started thinking about the psychology behind entitlement. People like Mrs. Langley assume that they can bend rules to their favor, that others won't enforce boundaries. But when they meet patience, proper preparation, and authority, their arrogance collapses. They are forced to confront reality, and it's often humiliating. And humiliation, in a way, is part of the lesson. Not cruelty but clarity. She learned that boundaries matter, respect matters, and rules matter. She learned that overstepping can backfire in unexpected ways. And I learned something too. The power of staying calm, strategic, and letting justice work quietly in your favor. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, but the memory of those trucks, the sheriff's visit, and her initial smugness lingered. It became part of the quiet lore of our street. And every time I walked past my garage, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not from gloating, but from knowing that patience, rules, and authority had delivered a lesson more effective than anger ever could. Sometimes, I would even catch her looking at my garage again, her expression mixed with resentment and realization. She had learned that entitlement has limits, and those limits are enforced, not by shouting or confrontation, but by the steady, quiet power of law, preparation, and observation. That experience stayed with me. It wasn't just a story about a garage and 2 trucks. It was a story about how to handle conflict, how to let consequences unfold, and how to win without losing your composure. And in the quiet moments of reflection, I understood that this was one of the most powerful lessons I'd ever witnessed firsthand. The power of rules, the inevitability of consequences, and the satisfaction of seeing someone confronted by the reality they tried to ignore. Mrs. Langley had tried to play a bold game. She had assumed she could overstep, laugh it off, and maintain her image. But the truth, the quiet authority, and the patience to let things unfold naturally had shown her the reality. And sometimes, the best stories of karma and justice aren't loud, they're quietly unforgettable. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood finally settled back into its usual rhythm. The trucks were gone, Mrs. Langley had retreated, and the garage was secure. But the story didn't end there. What had happened left a mark, not just on her, but on everyone around us, including me. I started noticing subtle changes in the dynamics of our street. People were more respectful, more cautious, more aware of boundaries. Conversations at the mailbox or in passing now included nods or quiet acknowledgments of the events that had unfolded. Nobody needed to retell the story in detail, everyone already knew what had happened. The lesson was clear: don't overstep, and always respect rules and property. Mrs. Langley tried a few minor things afterward, small attempts at asserting control or proving she wasn't defeated. A misplaced yard item here, a casual comment there. But by then, the pattern was clear. The neighborhood had seen what happened when she assumed she could take over something that wasn't hers. Her credibility had taken a hit, and no one was willing to indulge her antics. She had learned, quietly, painfully, that entitlement has limits. For me, the experience was transformative in a different way. I realized that conflict doesn't need to be solved with anger, confrontation, or shouting matches. It can be handled with patience, strategy, and a clear understanding of your rights. I didn't need to fight her head-on. I didn't need to escalate. I let the system, the rules, and the quiet power of authority take over, and the results spoke for themselves. I also reflected on human nature. People like Mrs. Langley often assume the world will bend to their desires. They see boundaries as suggestions, not rules. They test limits, believing consequences won't come. And when they do, it can be dramatic, even shocking. But there's a satisfaction in knowing that justice, patience, and calm strategy are far more effective than reacting emotionally. The neighborhood continued to thrive. Children played safely. Neighbors greeted each other politely. And every now and then, Mrs. Langley would glance at my garage, perhaps remembering the moment she realized she had overstepped. I didn't gloat, and I never needed to. The lesson had been delivered, quietly but permanently. I often think back to the day I first saw the trucks in my garage. The shock, the disbelief, the surge of emotion I felt. I remember how quickly I shifted from panic to strategy, realizing that calm action and knowledge of the rules were my strongest allies. That day taught me that in life, sometimes the most dramatic outcomes come not from confrontation, but from preparation and letting the proper channels handle the situation. Over time, I shared parts of this story with trusted friends, neighbors, and even at casual social gatherings. The narrative became more than just an incident with a garage, it became a lesson in patience, authority, and karma. People would nod, laugh quietly, and remark about how entitlement can backfire in ways people never expect. And every time I recounted it, I remembered the satisfaction of witnessing justice unfold naturally. For Mrs. Langley, the experience left a lasting impact. She became cautious in ways she never had been before. She stopped pushing boundaries and learned to respect the limits of others' property and space. While she never admitted defeat directly, her behavior spoke volumes. The message was clear: entitlement has consequences, and those consequences are often unavoidable. For me, the story reinforced my confidence in handling conflict thoughtfully. I realized that true power isn't about being loud or intimidating. It's about understanding your rights, preparing carefully, and letting the right systems enforce consequences. That's the kind of power that lasts, the kind that teaches lessons without unnecessary confrontation, and the kind that earns quiet respect. Looking back on the entire saga, from the moment I saw the trucks to the sheriff's involvement, to Mrs. Langley's retreat, to the neighborhood's changed perspective, I feel a sense of closure. The conflict was resolved. Justice was served. And the lesson was unforgettable. I also recognized a deeper truth. Karma doesn't always hit immediately, and revenge isn't always about anger. Sometimes, it's about letting consequences flow naturally, letting the system work, and staying calm while the universe does the rest. In this story, that approach created the perfect outcome. Mrs. Langley learned her lesson, I maintained my peace, and the neighborhood benefited from a clear example of boundaries being respected. Even now, walking past my garage, I feel that quiet satisfaction. Not from triumph or gloating, but from knowing the situation unfolded exactly as it should. It was a reminder that sometimes, the best victories are subtle, methodical, and deeply satisfying. The garage, the lease, the sheriff's involvement, and my calm approach all came together to create a story that still resonates. And the final lesson? Boundaries matter. Respect matters. Authority matters. And those who assume they can overstep without consequence often discover, sometimes painfully, that the rules exist for a reason. This wasn't just a story about a garage and 2 trucks. It was a story about patience, justice, human nature, and the quiet power of letting karma take its course. And in the end, that's what made it unforgettable.